In 1996, the movie Matilda, an adaptation of Roald Dahl's children's book, was released in theaters across the U.S. As summer vacation crept to an end, families packed their minivans and headed to cinemas to escape the heat and watch the story of the title character.
Matilda was a smart young girl with telekinetic powers who wanted to escape her home life and rotten family by going to school, where her neglectful parents refused to enroll her. In the story, when Matilda finally did get to go to school, it was nothing like she expected. She loved learning, her new friends, and her teacher. But Matilda found herself in a school run by the hard-nosed disciplinarian and larger-than-life principal, Agatha Trunchbull.
In Miss Trunchbull's school, breaking the rules was met with an array of bizarre punishments. For some students, like Matilda, disobeying the principal got them time locked inside the chokey, a cramped, dark closet with rusty nails and glass shards poking in from the walls.
But in the movie's final act, Matilda uses her superpowers to drive the villain Miss Trunchbull out of the school. After that, she gets adopted by her teacher and never has to see her horrible parents ever again.
It's a kid's movie. There's a happy ending.
In that same month, August of '96, a real-life boy was also escaping a tough home life by joining a new school. Mihailo Kofel was on his way from Verkhovina Bystra in Ukraine to Miami, Florida, where he was about to be a student at Holy Cross Academy and a trainee monk at its monastery.
And Mike's experience would be weirdly similar to the one families were watching on screens across the country. For him, school would be different than he imagined and full of strict rules, hard structure, and disciplinarians. He and his friends would even spend time locked away in a closet as punishment. But that's where the similarities stop. Mike's story doesn't tie up neatly with a happy little ending. No, his story would end in murder. I'm Paula Barros.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
And this is Sacred Scandal.
He did commit a murder, and it's horrible, but there was something underneath the surface. It was not just black and white. It wasn't just him killing a nun. It was something more in there, and I 100% believe that.
For me, it wasn't right that everybody just make Mihailo the only person who is responsible for this. But I believe that it wasn't just because of wine or because he was mad at Sister Michelle. It has to be something else.
In this episode, we pick up Mike's story in August 1996, as he arrives in Miami to start training as a monk and become a student in Holy Cross Academy. It's from here that everything started to change again for him, and Mike says things started happening at school and in the monastery that set him on a course to murder Sister Michelle Lewis.
We'll also be hearing from some of the people who were closest to Mike during his time at Holy Cross, and their words paint a more complete picture of his daily life.
But let's get started in those early days of Mike's arrival in Miami, just as school was getting ready to begin.
I remember the very first thing I remember stepping out of the airplane on American soil in Miami in the summer of 1996 was being so humid and hot, and just then we got to the property of Holy Cross. I thought the school looked like one giant castle. So I remember just being really nervous and scared of going to school in Holy Cross. I didn't speak English. That made it, of course, really, really more difficult.
In Ukraine, Mike says Father Wendt told him that he and the other monastic candidate, Petro, would have their own private tutor to help them learn English. But when they showed up for school the first day, that wasn't the case. The plan was for them to sit in classes with the youngest kids in the school, and learn English in the same way that they were learning to read and write. They already stood out in the school as foreigners and wore totally different uniforms. But now they'd also be in classrooms with kids who were almost 10 years younger than they were.
So basically, we had to attend first class with first graders. There was English. So basically, we were sitting there with the first graders. I was just being so embarrassed because we had to repeat the basic words, sentences like cat, dog, and so basically we were just learning.
And how did that make you feel?
Still the first year was really difficult. I was still trying to adjust to the culture, to the students, the teachers. I don't know. Of course, I didn't know anybody. It was quite a hard time at the beginning.
In those earliest days at Holy Cross, Mike struggled. There was so much to learn so quickly in order to get caught up with the students his own age. On top of that, school was different than in Ukraine. He had to move from class to class during the day instead of staying in one room. And navigating his new surroundings without being able to speak the language was a challenge. The initial excitement of getting to move to America and live his dream of being a monk was starting to wear off.
I was still trying to adjust, and I'm from a small town, being this big city, and just really fell out, of course, felt like a strange out of place, really. And it wasn't just me who had hard time to adjust. Of course, Petro also going through hard times. And I remember, after 3 months, we really hit it there. So me and Petro, we wanted to leave.
At night, Mike says he and Petra would stay up in their shared bedroom and talk about whether they should stay in Florida or leave. After only about 3 months in Miami, the pair made a decision. They would go together to Father Wendt and tell him they were giving up and were ready to go home.
We talking to Father Wendt about it, and we were ready to go back. As I remember, he gave me this letter from my parents, and in a letter, my parents said that my grandfather died, and everybody from my town, saying hello, they're proud of me. So I remember just crying. I remember crying, learning that my grandfather died, and just so me and Petro decided to continue our studies.
So basically, you told Father Wendt you wanted to go back to Ukraine, and he showed you this letter from your parents saying that they were so proud of you for being in Miami and doing the monastery thing. Wow. In your mind, did you feel like going back to Ukraine was worse than staying where you were?
At the time, yes. I didn't want to go, but I really didn't want to go. I still hated a lot of things about being back in Ukraine. Of course, then we, started to learn more English and got a little bit easier. But it was a difficult time. I remember just always in the morning, just going to school, just being really, really nervous about it.
After reading that letter, the boys committed to staying at Holy Cross. In the following months, Mike's English improved and his nerves about going to school calmed down. Over the years, more boys like Mike and Petra would arrive at Holy Cross. Some would stay and others would quit the monastery and move back to Ukraine. In Mike's third year at Holy Cross, Ilya Herzog arrived in Miami after spending 2 years at the training center in Ukraine.
When candidates like Mike and Ilya signed up to become monks, they knew they would be on a strict schedule of prayer, work, and study. It's how they lived in the candidate's house before coming to the United States. And, as Mike told us, he assumed the priests would be living that way too. But he says they rarely ever came to morning or evening prayers, and only showed up for Sunday services when Holy Cross parents and other people from the community were involved. And when Ilya arrived, he also noticed that religious life at Holy Cross was not meeting the same standards as in Ukraine.
We didn't have to confess like we used to do here in Ukraine, at least one a month or something like this. In there, it was enough, one in a year, so it was unusual because here we really felt that we are preparing to be a monk. And when we came there, we prayed every day, but nothing more. It was school, Holy Cross Academy, and we didn't feel like growing up in a religious way.
Yeah, you didn't feel like the monastic program was like serious enough?
It wasn't increasing in any way. I would say it rather stopped for me.
Okay.
It was a little bit surprising.
Aside from the relaxed attitude on monastic life, Mike and Ilya said there were other things going on inside the monastery that, in hindsight, felt out of sorts. Neither Mike or Ilya could call home regularly because their parents didn't have a phone. And in 5 years, Mike says he had the chance to speak with his mom and dad maybe twice. But the monastic candidates were able to send their families letters, which they wrote in Ukrainian. Those letters, though, first had to be given to Father Wendt in unsealed envelopes.
Father Wendt was reading every letter from Ukraine or to Ukraine.
But it's important to remember that these monks were still just teenage boys, and that they saw Father Wendt as the authority of the monastery. So Mike and Ilya said they never questioned this practice. They were just kids who were doing as they were told. And they wrote home to say that things were going just fine at Holy Cross.
I don't know if he went through everything, or he just tell us to leave the letters open so they discourage people from writing anything bad or just whatever. Well, most of the time, I try not to write anything negative or something.
Even though so much attention was paid to their mail, Ilya says that over time, he felt ignored by the priests altogether. In Miami, he says all of their focus seemed to be on Mike and Petro, the two original candidates. Each of them served as a priest assistant, Mike with Father Damien and Petro with Father Wendt.
Mike and Petro were separated in other ways, too. When new boys started arriving in Miami, Mike told us that he and Petro were moved out of the rooms shared by all the monks and given their own private bedrooms. Mike had a space in the same house as the other candidates and Father Damien. But Petro moved into another building where only he and Father Wendt lived.
So Petro was there most of the time. He was right hand of Father Wendt, so he was helping him with everything.
Both Mike and Ilya were growing unhappy with the way things were going at Holy Cross, and they formed a friendship over these feelings of doubt. For Ilya, the time he spent between the training center in Ukraine and Holy Cross made him realize that he wasn't ready for life as a monk.
I decided by myself to become a priest or a monk. And then in 3 years, I decided to finish with this. It was naturally. It was because I went to school, to Holy Cross Academy, and there I decided that I want to have friends, to have a girlfriend. I understood that I'm not ready to finish with this.
Ilya would spend weeks thinking about this decision. He told us he would walk to Father Wendt's door to tell the priest he was ready to leave. Then, before knocking, he'd second-guess himself and walk away. After that, a few days later, he would go back and leave again. He repeated that cycle over and over until he finally worked up the courage to tell the priest that he was done. He'd finish out the final months of the school year and go back to Ukraine.
At the same time, Ilya couldn't quite put his finger on why Mike was having issues at Holy Cross. But he knew that because of what his family life was like in Ukraine, he was also too afraid to tell the priests about his feelings.
It was understood, it was like obvious. But he was afraid that they would send him back to Ukraine immediately. He didn't want to go back. We were chatting a lot. Like some days it was like every evening. And I don't remember exactly in what way it was said, but I understood that he's not happy there. But it was never like, come on, let's run away or something like this.
Mike says that he did want to get away. He just didn't know how. And his sadness came from something that he was too ashamed to tell Ilya. It's something he was too ashamed to talk about with anyone back then. That's coming up after a break. Welcome back to Sacred Scandal.
And can I ask you, when you were in Holy Cross, what did they tell you about interacting with other students?
The priest told us when we're taking classes with other students to never, talk to them or interact with them, because we're supposed to be training to be monks. Yeah, we really were not supposed to talk to them.
As a student at Holy Cross Academy, this rule that Mike is talking about is also something that I remember. As students, we were told that we weren't supposed to talk to the monastic candidates because it could influence them in worldly ways.
And did you want to talk to them?
Oh, yeah, of course. And of course I did, I did. But it felt like you always had to look over your shoulder when you did so.
If I got caught talking to a monastic candidate, maybe the worst that would happen was maybe get a demerit or, a Saturday detention. But you never saw the monastic candidates in detention, so back then, I just assumed they were never in any trouble. 20 years ago, I never knew or even thought about how those boys might be disciplined for breaking this rule.
For me, it was I was punished sometimes. I believe it was just like staying in a room. It was laundry room. I stayed there, especially at the end when I told that I want to leave, and I stayed in that room a lot.
For how long?
Maybe 2 hours. They go to a restaurant or go to a movie, and you stay home at that room.
Mike told us that he was also disciplined by being locked in that little room. But usually his punishment was cleaning or doing chores for Sister Michelle, the nun in training who he would one day murder.
She was the one, if we messed up or we broke the rules, so we would get punished. So they would send me to help her. We had to do everything she said.
Like what?
Clean the house where she stayed, clean everything. That was one of the things I hated. She always just never happy, never really like, this is not clean enough, this is not good enough, so do this over again, have to clean this over again, and just being always mean. Yeah, definitely.
Ilya told us that he had to work for Sister Michelle too, cutting the grass near her house or cleaning. But he didn't mind working for her. It reminded him of chores he had to do at home in Ukraine. In the end, he said, the priests had figured out the punishments that would have the most impact on each monastic candidate.
They were good psychologists, so they knew who was punished by work or by staying alone.
When Mike first arrived at Holy Cross back in 1996, he knew there was a second priest living there, Father Damien. But Mike says back in Ukraine, Father Wentz said nothing about any women living at the monastery.
So, when you arrived at Holy Cross, did you already know that there would be nuns there?
No, I didn't. Father Wentz, he didn't tell us there was a nun. It was Sister Michelle. I remember the first impression was like she was a really unfriendly person, just hardly ever laughed or smiled.
Was she in charge of getting you guys ready for school? What was her role when it came to you guys, you and Petro?
She was the one in charge of saying the morning prayers and the evening prayers during the weekday.
Mike told investigators that the Sister Michelle he got to know was different from what regular students, teachers, and parents may have observed.
Yeah, well, there were many instances. There was, that she was yelling at me or other candidates. I always had to look over my shoulder to see if the priest or her are not around. If I talk to other students, my friends. So yeah, she saw if she see me talking to one of the students, she would say, yeah, she definitely yell. You're not allowed. She would yell. You're not allowed to talk to the other students. Yeah.
Did she yell at you often?
Yeah.
And what sort of things would she say?
For example, if she called me names, you useless, you Ukrainian trash, and just really just being really.
Did she treat the other monastic candidates the same way as you?
No, she was also mean to them. Yeah.
And what was she mean to the other students at the school?
Oh, she definitely treated us differently, because we pretty much were helpless there. We were on our own, and we were part of the church. And, of course, she couldn't just be yelling at the students because they were, the parents were paying for them to go there. So she couldn't yell at them. Yeah, definitely.
And also he hated Sister Michelle, but it wasn't like I gonna kill her. It just was like Sister Michelle always were telling things about Mishas to the priests, so it wasn't good for him.
But Ilya would not be the only person to see the tension between Mike and Sister Michelle.
I went to different school every year up until Holy Cross. Holy Cross is the first school I ever went to 2 years in a row.
Danielis Pereira spent only her freshman and sophomore years at Holy Cross Academy. She told us that because she moved from school to school so much, she often had trouble making friends or fitting in when she was always the new girl at school. It was no different at Holy Cross.
I was always never great at, I don't know if it's saying making friends or, interacting, because most people always have cliques and stuff like that. So I made a few friends, but mainly I really kept to myself. And, I seeked other outsiders.
As she got familiar with Holy Cross, she saw that the monastic candidates were some of those outsiders. The kids no one could talk to, who floated on the edges of the student body.
Well, I remember it was kind of like Handmaid's Tale. They always had to be with another one. They could never really be alone, so they were always in pairs.
At Holy Cross, Danielis became the one student that got to know Mike best during his time there. Or at least, as well as she could get to know someone who she wasn't supposed to be talking to at all. Despite being reprimanded by teachers, Danielis says she spent most days eating lunch with Mike and another monastic candidate, Vasil Kopic, Ilya's cousin. She says she always saw them paired together.
So how did that start, the eating lunch?
I remember it. I was friends with Jessica. And she was talking to somebody else, and I wasn't interested. And I look over, and Mikhailo and Vasil are just sitting by themselves on a table. And I'm like, you know what? Screw it. I get up and I go take my tray and I go over there and sit down with them. And I remember I went over and I go, hey, can I sit down here? And he's like, yeah, sure. Mikhailo was the first one. He's like, yeah, sure, sit down. And I sat down and I started talking and I started asking questions because I was interested. I'm like, oh, so you're from the Ukraine. So you're going to be a monk? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, okay, that's cool.
After that, Daniela says she made it a point to sit with the two of them most days. Vasil was still learning English at the time, so she mostly talked to Mike about the classes they had together, their teachers, and sometimes basketball. But she was also curious about why a teenager would decide to become a monk in the first place.
Because it's like you're so young to dedicate your life to basically servitude. I remember kind of flat out asking him, do you really want to be a monk? And him come inching towards me and kind of in a whisper going, no, no, I really want to be a teacher. I want to get the American education. And I really want to be a school teacher. That's something he really wanted to do. But it was a wonderful opportunity for him. He saw it as his golden ticket. He can do this and, go through it for a few years, get his education, and then get out.
Daniela says that Mike told her about these secret ambitions a few times, but that he never said how he planned to become a teacher. She also noticed that their conversations only ever got more personal like this when they had a few moments alone.
That's when I noticed the whole thing about how they always had to be together. It was when he'd be more open to me when Vasil was away getting napkins or getting something. That's when he would say something more, to me. Mind you, I'm 16 years old, so my mind is not noticing all those little things, but I should have been that's not normal, Now in hindsight, I can look back and be total Handmaid's Tale. How they're always together. So if somebody does something wrong, the other one will tell Father Abbott or Father Damien, they'll get in trouble.
One day during the school year, Danielis was walking alone between classes when she witnessed something that made her worry about Mike.
I remember an interaction once I saw with Sister Michelle and Mikhailo Kafel. I was going up to class, going up the stairs, and she was yelling at him for something, and he was standing looking down on the floor, looking at his feet while she was belittling him and talking down to him. He looked like when somebody scolds a 5-year-old, just completely submissive, looking down straight at the floor while she was talking to him. And I remember walking away, and like that obviously upset me.
The next time she and Mike were alone, Danielis asked him about what happened that day.
Honestly, I remember that one time when I confronted him. Like, I asked him, because I saw that, and then afterwards I asked him, I'm like, hey, I saw Sister Michelle being mean to you. Are you okay? What happened? That's when he told me she's not a nice person. She's very mean. She makes fun of his accent. She makes fun of if he messes up with a word. Like, instead of correcting him, she like literally made fun of it, and she was just very mean. She was a bully to him, 100%.
By March 2001, Daniela switched schools again, and she learned about Sister Michelle's murder on the news. When she first saw Mike's mugshot on TV, with cuts and scratches on his face, she couldn't believe that the boy she spent so much time talking with could do something so terrible.
That was like a punch in the gut. Last person I would ever suspect to kill anybody would have been Mikhailo. During the time in school, he was one of my closest friends. And he was just such a sweet person that I was like, immediately, like, people reverse and like, oh my God, he's a monster for doing that. I the opposite. I'm like, I immediately thought of when I caught her yelling at him in the hallway. But I'm like, there has to be a reason. Like, I immediately knew, like, there has to be a reason he did this. This couldn't be him being like evil or wanting to kill somebody. Something must have happened for him to, suddenly snap and kill Sister Michelle.
Did he ever tell you that he was depressed?
No, never did. I really did feel it, like I felt like maybe he was sad and stuff, but I didn't know what it could be the cause. Like he never like took the confidence in me to tell me anything that was going on with him, so I really don't know.
But Mike says there was more going on in his life than just Sister Michelle that gave him this aura of sadness. We'll get to that after a break.
Welcome back to Sacred Scandal. I'm Paula Barros.
And I'm Melanie Bartley.
Back in 1996, when Mike and Petro Tarenta first arrived in Miami, they were both paired off with one of the two priests to work as their assistant or helper. Petro was first paired with Father Damien Gibault, and Mike would help Father Wendt. And the priest would be a sort of mentor for the monks.
In these early days, when Mike was struggling with adapting to life in Miami and at the monastery, he said he could go to Father Wendt to talk about his problems. But one night, when he went to speak to the priest, Mike says everything changed.
I remember first few months I had to help out Wendt. So me and Wendt were talking. I was going through a really depressed and going through some really difficult times. So Wendt said, was going on. So, like I was in his house, right, Wendt's house. He says, one of the apostles, remember, put his head on Jesus' chest. So he says, it's like, so he used that. It's like, he said it was okay, like, physical contact. So I remember him running his hands across my chest and private parts and thigh.
When this happened, he said his body just froze. He told us he was uncomfortable and couldn't react. Mike told police in his confession that this is how the sexual abuse he claims took place at Holy Cross began, and that this same situation happened again while he served as Father Wendt's assistant. After about 8 months of working as Wendt's assistant, for some unknown reason, Mike says things switched. He was reassigned to Father Damien, and Petro would now assist Father Wendt. Not long after this change, Mike says, he witnessed Petro being touched in the same way that he was when he needed to go back to Wendt's house one night after their curfew.
I forgot I had Wendt's key, so I was returning back. Once I returned back, I've seen the same thing. I've seen Father Wendt, like his hands was all over Petro's chest and his stomach, just rubbing him. So yeah, I've seen it with my own eyes.
You said he quoted the Bible when he was doing that?
Oh yeah, they basically used the Bible, whatever they needed to, to manipulate us.
Mike says that the priest used his position as a man of God and an authority in their monastery to create these situations. He also said that when he switched to working for Father Damien, things were no different and the abuse didn't stop. He says it started one day while they were driving to get groceries. Mike told us Father Damien started rubbing Mike's thigh in the car. From there, things escalated.
And with him, he was really, he was really more predator. Definitely more predator. Definitely predator. I remember also we have like confession, and during the confession, he would also like touch me, like my private parts, and eventually also gave me these pills because I was going through a depression. So he asked me, he told me, well, you can have my pills. So he gave me also his own pills, which was anti-anxiety pills.
How did those pills make you feel? What was the effect?
I was just high and I guess more relaxed. So you know that, and he would give the pills to me, and I know he had this. Okay, he had TV, right? Yeah, he had all the channels. So he would watch. He would watch like soft porn and stuff. And also during watching the like soft porn, he would just get aroused, and then of course he would order me to undress, like to my briefs, and then so he was like wrap. So he wrapped all my private parts, and then he would and rubbing his hands all over my body, then grabbing my penis, and just I remember I got wrecked, and he started laughing, and I remember him saying something like, "Oh, you like it?" And he was laughing, and I was just really like being shocked.
Mike says that being called to Father Damien's room like this at night happened often and was done in secret. He also claims that he was given his own private room as a way of hiding the abuse from other monks. In the night, Mike says Father Damien summoned him down to his own room after everyone went to bed, and none of the other monks would see him leave. Once in Father Damien's room, Mike says the priest would set an alarm for 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning, when he would send Mike back down to his room before the other boys in the house were awake.
That was one of the worst times in my life, because you always trust the priest. You always try to obey whatever is said, and there will, of course, punishments if you disobey or anything. So my whole mind was just unimaginably like this agony.
Mike told us and police that over the years he was touched by Father Damien on numerous occasions and raped by the priest at least 6 times. And, he says, these feelings of shame and agony hung over him while he lived in that same house as Father Damien. He says he wanted to get away, but also didn't want to go back to his home in Ukraine. So Mike says he started trying to find a way out.
I remember when Gibbo was not around, I used this computer. I looked up the recruitment center, like Army recruitment center. So when I was not around, I looked up and got their phone number. So I called this Army recruitment guy, and I said, can I be part of the Army and stuff? And he said, he told me I couldn't because I was not American resident or citizen. So
Mike says he felt frustrated and trapped in his situation. But in 2000, Mike graduated from Holy Cross and things changed. After Mike finished high school, he, Petro, and Father Wendt were all taking classes at Barry University, a Catholic college about 25 miles away from the monastery. So, to be closer to the school, the 3 of them rented a house near the university campus. It was at this time, Mike says, he started to feel more free. At school, he told us that he would take off his tie and jacket to blend in more with the other students. And he was also able to drive by himself between Holy Cross and the Barry house. When in the car with the priests, they had the dial set to the classical radio stations. But on his own, Mike had the freedom to choose his own soundtrack.
I remember driving to campus, and just turning on the radio and just listening to regular popular songs.
Do you remember a song or an artist that you would like to listen to?
Oh yeah. One of them called Kryptonite, Three Doors Down. They're just those songs, the late 90s popular songs. I remember that when we were going back to the house, I had to go back to Glass Station. Make sure. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah.
Even though Mike started to feel happier once he got out of high school, those feelings were only temporary. Mike, Petro, and Went only lived at the Berry House during the week when they had classes. On the weekend, they came back to Holy Cross to pray at the monastery and help with church services on Sunday. It was then, Mike says, that he'd be called to Father Damien's room again in the night, and he would become depressed and angry. Mike told us he'd been holding in these growing feelings for 5 years at Holy Cross. He said he was too ashamed to tell anyone about the abuse and too afraid to give up his life and schooling in the U.S. to move back to Ukraine. And he told us how he started to question his own faith and became angry and confused. But it all culminated on the night of the murder, when he says was the last time he was raped.
The whole thing was really building up. The whole rage was already building up more and more. I pretty much lost my religion by the time. I was like praising God and hated the priest, everything, just hated my life. I remember being suicidal, really suicidal. I had time I really wanted to kill myself. Because I was still really struggling inside, still from the abuse to everything, and just there was still nights I had trouble falling asleep because so much just going through my mind. And so I remember just being really suicidal. So I had this knife. I remember just cutting myself because I felt a little bit better once I cut myself. Just remember cutting myself. I still have some scars from cutting myself from the knife.
And let me ask, were you cutting yourself at the time that you were being abused by Damien?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Did he ever notice your scars, your wounds?
Yeah, and I would basically lie, I say something, or I just, I scratched myself by accident, I was going by the fence and I cut myself, on the fence, and just, basically, I would lie.
And so, the night you killed Sister Michelle, you were raped by Damien. That same night, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Can you walk me through that?
At that night, I just remember I was in his room, right, and he was really like bad mood. So I remember him pushing me down on bed and taking my briefs off and just pushing me down and just pushing himself on top of me. So and raping me. And then after he was done, he fell asleep. I remember getting his key because at the time, whenever he was asleep, snoring, I would get his key. I would go to like school and to school rooms or other rooms, and I was just using the key to go through rooms in school, and then I went to and got the bottle of wine, and that's when I eventually got drunk.
Hello? Can you hear me? Hello? Did I lose you?
Since Melanie and I started talking to Mike 15 years ago, we've asked each other the same question. If he was being abused by the priests, why did he murder Sister Michelle?
And his answer has been the same every time. He's told us that he doesn't know. He just lost his mind and snapped. It's a reason we always struggle with, because it seems so hard to comprehend, so unreal. And to be honest, we've not always felt like it was the truth. Like there's more to it that he's afraid to tell us.
But this year, when we talked to Danielis, the girl who ate lunch with Mike at Holy Cross, she told us a story about herself that put Mike's reasoning into perspective. And it helped us understand how someone like Mike, overwhelmed with rage, can be capable of doing something so terrible. So, Danielis came to Holy Cross with her sister, who was a little bit younger than her. She had a hard time fitting in at the school and was being bullied pretty badly by other kids. It's why their mom eventually took them out of Holy Cross. Danielis said she did her best to get the kids to stop, but one day an older girl was picking on her 8-year-old sister, and Danielis had seen enough.
I literally grabbed her hair above her ears and I banged her head in the corner of the cafeteria metal bench chair. I was banging her head like that. I wanted to destroy her. At one point, when I hit her head against that, she opened her mouth and her eyes got super glassy. And then the 2 PE coaches pulled me off. I snapped, and I know I could have killed her. I know I could, because I saw the reaction on her face when I banged her head in the corner. She was bleeding in the back of her head. I could have killed her. I snapped back, and I'm like, what the hell am I doing? Like, I'm gonna kill this girl. And because your rage takes over, and when your rage takes over, it's hard to control that when your anger and rage just goes. So I really do sympathize. Like, obviously for Mikhailo to have done what he did, you know, you don't stab somebody, 93, 96 times? You don't stab somebody like that without it being complete loss of control, pure rage. You know, he probably wasn't even in his own body. It wasn't until afterwards that he came out of it, or I don't know, like, honestly.
This is the sort of reasoning that Mike's lawyers would use for his defense. But even though he confessed to the murder, this case would not be simple. It would drag on through the Miami legal system for almost 5 years and take police and attorneys from both sides all the way to Transcarpathia, Mike's home, in search of answers. All that is next time on Sacred Scandal. Sacred Scandal is a production of Exile Content Studio in partnership with iHeartRadio's My Cultura podcast network. Sacred Scandal was created and produced by Melanie Bartley and me, Paula Barros. Our senior producer is Dennis Funk of Written in Air. The executive producers are Rose Reed and Nando Villa. Our production assistant is Imani Leonard. The show is fact-checked by Kimberly Winston. Original music was composed by Patrick Hart. And special thanks on this episode to Brian Robertson and Travis Roig. If you'd like to reach out, email us at hello@sacredscandalpodcast.com. And you can follow us on Instagram @Sacred Scandal.